Don't feel under the weather. We're all in this together.
Is what I'm doing right or wrong? Not everyone seems to follow along. Thought all we wanted was happiness. People seem to be more interested in their own needs. Maybe we can work this out.
And I guess the city ain't too pretty now that things are so insane. But I hope you can use your brain. I must confess that I can feel lonely, but I know I'm not alone. Cause you're right here with me. You just gotta believe me. You're no longer on your own. Don't feel under the weather. We're all in this together. The city ain't too pretty now that things are so insane. But I hope you can use your brain. I must confess, I miss this whole committee. There's no point in feeling blue together. There is nothing we can do. Me and you, you and me and you.
Ayy, we're internationally digital, collabing with the brightest colors you could ever vividly imagine. Fueled by passion, watch us take action. Flying high like we got a ride from Aladdin. So long, this is not a slow song. This a Mario mushroom to make you grow strong. Cliff hanging by one hand, but still I hold on. Sometimes I feel like the hope's gone,
but I know I'm not alone. Cause you're right here with me. You just gotta believe me. You're no longer on your own. Don't feel under the weather. We're all in this together.
One of the earliest memories that I had as a child was being bused to school. I grew up in public housing with family, friends, a strong community. And on that bus ride, I passed our neighborhood schools. We passed our neighborhood churches, grocery stores, my grandparents' house. And we went into spaces that were filled with people who did not look like us, educators who did not look like us. And somehow we were being exposed to something better. And that was the thinking, that was the idea. However, that left a deep, deep impression on me. And so those are the experiences that actually brought me to where I am right now as a Black Montessorian. I attended 2 HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, Fisk University and Howard University. I majored in social work. I was a homeschooling mom. I started a homeschool collective. Education was critical to my family. We wanted our children to be able to have their psychic integrity intact and be able to learn about their culture and their ancestors. And so we took it upon ourselves to do that for them and with them. I also had a mother who was a Montessori assistant and has been for 15 years now. And she first introduced me to Montessori. And I must say that after that introduction, there was no turning back. So now, 4 credentials later, I am a Montessori educator, I'm a Montessori administrator, and I am an equity practitioner. My name is Maati Wofford, and I am the founder and principal consultant at Radiant Mind Solutions. It is an equity in education movement. What we do is we work with educators. We work with Montessori teachers, which I love to do. I'm passionate about this work. I love, and actually what I love most is working with teacher training programs, because then you have the ability to impact those who impact our children each and every day. So some of the things that we do in those spaces where we're working with educators and we're working with directors of teacher training programs is we are looking at identity. We're trying to understand and pull back the layers of bias behaviors, things that are sometimes unconscious, things in the classroom, like, really understanding how our circle time can be more equitable, how our classroom meetings, our classroom management style, and the way that we approach our students. So Montessori philosophy is certainly rooted in social justice and peace and justice. And we also have to continue to refine our own selves so that we can be those educators that are truly rooted in that social justice philosophy. What does that look like? It looks like going deep and understanding who you are and where you came from as an educator. Understanding the power and the privilege that and the oppression that actually lives in our Montessori spaces. We have to also look at, once we understand all of that and kind of grapple with that, we have to understand how to disrupt that. What is that going to look like? What is it going to take? It's going to take us to ask questions. It's going to take us to be critical, pull out those albums, and make sure that every single lesson that we're giving, we are asking, whose story is not being told here? Who's being silenced? Why and how? And these are the first ways that we can really start to push into the true work of being an anti-bias, anti-racist educator. After we do the interruption, that's when we move into the illumination phase. And that's when we really work to understand how to be better advocates and how to aspire towards allyship. That's my work. And I stand by it. It wakes me up every day on fire. I'm truly excited about the work, engaging and building community, nation building, connecting educators, and helping them to find spaces where they can learn and find their own groups that they can then continue that work in their schools, in their institutions. So touching on that individual so they can go out into their community. That's the work. So Lerone Bennett Jr., he is a scholar, a Black American scholar and educator. He says that an educator in a system of oppression is either a revolutionary or an oppressor. My ask is that each and every day, choose the revolution. Thank you.
Waniki sak natasuis Siobhan Kisakiwielm, Nu Tomas Masipiat Kanatai Masipiat. Hello, my name is Siobhan Growing Elm. I am Mashpee Wampanoag and I live here in Mashpee. I work for the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. We have a school called Widamu Katnaton Takamak, where we have a primary and lower elementary classroom. We employ the Montessori pedagogy in service to our language and culture, and we are happy to join in the celebration today, and especially to support the Black Montessori Education Fund, to support Montessori for children of the global majority, for Black and Brown children, for Indigenous children, and we join in the celebration. Thank you for having us. Katapatontama Wanamu.
The purpose of this pavilion is to challenge all Montessorians to do better in all areas of our practice, no matter what roles we play in our community. The topics for the panel are based on Montessori's triad: the child, the adult, and the environment. There's a fourth panel, and that represents the connective lines and the space in the center of Dr. Montessori's triad. We are calling the fourth panel community. Now, about the community panel, it is designed to challenge Montessorians to think about peace education and social development as being entwined with social justice, ideals, and the individual development of the child as well as of the adult. I am very honored to introduce Sid Mohandas. Sid is calling in from the UK. Sid is a PhD researcher at Middlesex University, and he investigates how gender materializes in Montessori spaces, and he uses feminist post-human new materialistic theories to do this. Sid is a guest lecturer for the master's program module in interrogative policy and practice for social justice. Sid has CASA training. He is also a teacher educator. He is founder of the Male Montessorian, where he explores gender diversity and inclusion, putting forth his own knowledge and studies, as well as interviewing people who are experts in their field. He is also the founder of Montessori, and I'm sure many of us have enjoyed the gorgeous pictures and the snippets of crucial information that tell us more about the history of Montessori that is not often told. Sid also provides PhD courses, and he sits on the editorial board for Montessori magazine. Sid, welcome. I'm delighted to be working with you. Tatenda Blessing Muchiriri is calling us from the US, from Colorado. Tatenda is the founder of Montessori Lens, which highlights and uplifts global Montessori voices that are not usually given a platform, and he does it with great spirit and flair. Tatenda has infant, toddler, and CASA training. He was the American Montessori Society's Emerging Leaders Fellowship in 2018, and he is currently in a cohort as a member of Moonshoot Adventures Fellowship in Denver Metro. Tatenda is a board member of the Colorado Montessori Association. Welcome, Tatenda. I am very happy to be working with you today and want to learn more about your work. Koren Clark is also calling us from the US, California. She is founder of Know Thyself Inc., which is a culturally relevant Montessori materials and professional development organization. She is partner of Wildflower Schools, and she helps teachers develop liberated teacher-led Montessori micro schools. Koren is elementary trained and has additional teaching and administration certifications. She has conducted educational research internationally, and she also founded the Lotus Blossom Academy. Koren sits on the board of the Black Montessori Education Fund and Montessori Life, and Koren is a Montessori parent. For those of you who don't know, Koren recently wrote a fabulous article called Anti-Bias and Anti-Racist Work as a Spiritual Preparation of the Montessori Guide. And we know that Dr. Montessori calls us to know ourselves in order to better serve the child. So welcome, Koren. I'm excited to work with you. I'm calling in from Toronto, Canada. My story in Montessori started when my mother gave me a copy of The Absorbent Mind, and that was it. I was in forever. My two daughters attended Montessori school, and then I decided to take Montessori training myself. I am now delighted to be a Montessori grandparent. Two children graduated from our middle school, and two of my grandchildren are beginning their middle school. I'm elementary trained. I'm taught ages 6 through 15. I've been a department head in other schools, and now I am head of school of the Montessori Jewish Day School. Told you about my Montessori origin. My special interest came from a research paper for my master's degree. I titled it To Educate the Moral Practitioner, the place of ethics and moral agency in Montessori teacher education. It was a few years ago before we started talking about social justice, but I've always been interested in that, in the idea of ethics and moral agency. I've had the privilege of teaching philosophy and observation courses in several different training institutes in Canada. And I'm a lifetime member and former president of the Canadian Association of Montessori Teachers and current chair of the Canadian Council of Montessori Administrators. So Tatenda, if I may borrow from something you often share, a Senegalese proverb, you like to say, here I am, right here, right now, open. Montessori is not just about independence. It's about empowering the child to find their own path in society. That happens within their community, at school, and at home. Let's start by exploring what community means for each of your age groups.
Thank you, Regina. Wow, what an introduction and a panel. It just goes to say much about the community that we have today. And I'm so excited and humbled to just bring in the conversation more into our little ones from birth to 3. So community really for that age group, it means everything. This is how they're being introduced to the world, to the life, to the reality around them. And honestly, we cannot separate community from life. That's my understanding. You know, growing up in Zimbabwe, community was everything. When a child is born, he is not only or she is not only born to the family that they are born into, but to the whole community. I remember very well having neighbors, having uncles, having everyone come whenever there's a child born, and whenever a child starts walking. It's just like everyone is connected, everyone is involved. And I think when it comes to our environments, toddler and infant environments, we're saying that we are offering the same for our young children. We are offering them and we are giving them the world. So that to me is community. Whatever we're doing with them is community, because they are learning. They're just curious. They just want to know what does the world look like. So with the 0 to 3, it is just everything that we are fitting into their reality, into their self. That to me is community, and that is community for them.
Thank you, Tatenda. Sid, what is community for a 3 to 6 environment, a Casa de Bambini?
Fundamentally, community is about connection and care, and it is about holding space for difference. It is about inclusion, kinship, particularly toward those who are not or less cared for in our societies. And within the context of the current ecological sort of crisis that we are facing, I think community extends beyond the realm of the human, because what we are realizing is that we are inextricably entangled with the non-human world. And we need to think of community without actually forgetting that these things we are implicated with.
Koren, what about the sense of community for the elementary child, the 6 to 12?
It's so much fun to work in community with that age group, because they're at the sensitive period, not only for the imagination and, seeing the outer world, but for fairness. What is right? What is wrong? And how can they kind of, equal the playing field? So it's so beautiful to see 3 age groups working together to, help each other along the way and have this opportunity to reflect on not only where they were, but where they may be going, which is the essence of community within itself. Once they're able to do something like take the checkerboard out and recognize like, oh, I can solve this problem. I can solve tangible problems within my environment. Then they can see that they can also solve tangible problems within their social emotional environment and within the environment outside of the classroom. Problems like how can we get the hamster more food, to solving problems like how can I take care of this person, one of my peers who seems to always be getting picked on, to be able to recognize and have that barometer, which is beginning to develop at that age, for social emotional hygiene, right? For what it means to be able to be at peace within a group of people, and then to be able to turn that social emotional hygiene into a space of social justice, right? To say, this is what it is that I can do, and this is how I can affect change because I've been solving these problems.
That's beautiful. So we see from the beginning of that birth to 3 child being surrounded by reality and being part of the world and the world being part of him, to then Sid talking to us about connection and the bigger world, and then Koren bringing in the idea of the 6 to 12, the problem solving, the imagination, the fairness that then can be brought up to the larger world. I'm being called upon to talk about the 12 to 18, that child in that third plane of development. And that is such a crucial time, that of adolescent. It's such a sensitive time. I don't want to impose what happens in North America and South America to the rest of the world, but Traditionally, teenagers are seen to be difficult. They're seen to be out of society. They're seen to be rebellious. They're not seen for the beautiful people that they are. And in our environments where Montessori treats an adolescent as somebody worthy of respect, somebody capable of contributing and giving back to the community, then beautiful things happen. That adolescent is like a social newborn. So again, that parallel with the early years. And if the adolescent is given the tools to give back to their community, that's where they are. They really want to contribute. How does this understanding of community guide us in creating community guidelines that we can then build upon in collaboration with our students?
Just being able to recognize that there's three important pillars: the taking care of self, taking care of the environment, and taking care of others. You want the child and the children to be able to have an opportunity to understand and express who they are with each other, and to understand that they're interdependently connected. Whatever it is that they do is going to affect everybody. It's going to affect the environment, their neighbors, their friends. When we're creating guidelines in our classroom, it's fun to come up with your own set of norms, to talk to the children about what it is that they would like and who they are, but to root them not in like a whole list of things, but three central things there. They can take care of those three pillars and remember those, everything will fall in place.
The three pieces you said, to care for each other, to care for themselves, and to care for the community, is then expanded in the adolescent world. So it's a time when we talk about supporting them as they develop a strong character and a clear mind. And with that and all the values they've grown with and all the respect that has been given with them, then they're able to make their own guidelines for the community. In many of the adolescent training courses, they invite the adolescent guide to start the year by having activities through which the adolescent child learns who they are in a more conscious way and how they interact with each other. The children develop together a set of values that they want to live by. And it's a big, important exercise. And sometimes it's incredible the discussions they can have. They can come up to 20 values that they all want to live with as a group, and to choose only 8 that they can live by every day is quite wonderful. So Sid, can you tell us about how you see creating community guidelines?
So primarily, I believe that we have to come to terms with the fact that our world is inherently racialized, classed, non-disabled, gendered, cisnormative, neurotypical, and so forth. So we live in a very unjust world. And the fact is that children, very young children in the 3 to 6 sort of age group, are capable of sensing injustice and also capable of sensing difference, but also further on, they have the ability and the capacity to care. So I absolutely believe that nurturing connections and care is kind of core to the work we do in the CASA. Creating inclusive spaces, of course, involves how we live and relate to one another in the classroom. For instance, you cannot treat your staff uncaringly in the name of caring for children. For me, the starting point is what the feminist scholar Glenda McNaughton talks about, that the most potent sources of information about young children's gender, racial, and other subjectivity knowings are children themselves. And this involves listening to young children, listening to their perspectives, having dialogues with them about issues that surface in the life of the classroom. And this may involve deconstructing narratives, offering alternative narratives, and allowing children to grapple with differences that emerge in the classroom, as well as helping to cultivate a caring response to the differences that they see in the classroom. So primarily, I think the Montessori community has to be a responsive community, and responding to the emerging needs of all those who are tangled in the process of doing early childhood education. Koren, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's very inspiring to look at it that way, and the understanding that we are immersed in a community that is already polarized and that is already filled with the difference of power, right, and privilege, and that is very apparent to the children. And so, to go about our normal way of just quote unquote normalizing, we could normalize a lot of these indifferences. And so it's really important for us, as teachers, to have a clear idea of where we fall within the intersection of our own power and privilege, but to also be able to hold windows and mirrors for the children so that they can see that. So there is this idea of internalized racial oppression that people have, and internalized racial superiority. And oftentimes we lean towards the oppression, but we don't put as much emphasis on the internalized racial superiority, which creates oppressive climates within the classroom.
I think of it as we're saying, you talked about the community being at the center of the triangle that we talked about, the child, the prepared environment, and the aware adult. I also see it as the community as being the circle that is shielding, almost like protecting that triangle. And that really happens a lot at the 0 to 3. That age group, we are offering everything that's there in the community so that it's normalized, so that when they go to the CASA, they're already aware that, oh, there are teachers who speak differently. There are people who look differently. Because again, it is that age where they're just like absorbing everything, that sensitive period where they just want to take in everything. And we often talk about them being sensitive period of order. And that to me is they need to know what's there in this community, what's there in this world. You talked about fostering, Regina. I think we are really called to sustain and support that curiosity. Like, can we really sustain that? And how do we do that? Is by that representation, that offering of the true essence of community. That again, like what Koren is saying, like we need to be aware of those social injustices and offering them what in most cases hasn't been offered, and we're given an opportunity at that age group to offer that and normalize it. Also, just thinking about birth to 3, that their families are also like part of who they are. So as adults, as teachers, we are called to be in partnership, knowing who they are, and then how can we all come together, though we're coming from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, or different experiences, and how beautiful it is that we offer an environment that's rich in that.
I'm listening to all of you and I'm inspired. How do you see the interplay between social development and personal development?
We, as teachers, our essence is casting a shadow upon the child and or casting a light upon them that would allow them to really understand and shine in their identity. There's a balance between universalism and individualism. Both of these are very pertinent in the Montessori philosophy, and some people can lean into one or the other too much. We're all individuals, so I'm not going to look at how you've been socialized, and I'm just going to give you this individual work plan, but not recognize that your success, your work, all of this is, and or lack of success is contingent on how it is that you've been socialized. And if I were to say, universalism, we're all the same, I don't see color, I'm colorblind or whatnot, that's another sense of erasure. So again, like going back to what I said before, providing those windows and mirrors gives us a chance to balance between this universalism and this individualism. There's this dialectic between the individual and society. And it's that dialectical process that forms the child or the human. So there's socializing institutions. Schools are the biggest socializing institutions, and teachers are the biggest agents. For a child, especially a child who may come in with being marginalized or identity that's been erased, the narrative is, I am who I think you think I am. So there is definitely more influence, right, from the teacher. And so recognizing this, again, this power imbalance and the process, this dialectical process is very important. And also having an opportunity to really dig in deep to the different aspects of your identity. what makes me. Like, I could be 7, but I could also be a brother, and I could also be a part of a cultural organization. I can be, an artist, and there's all these different things that identify a child, that some of which are visible and some of which are invisible, some of which are given, some of which are malleable, all of these things. But for the child, especially within that age group, to get a chance to construct and deconstruct, and also be able to see really clearly what aspects of their quote unquote identity are imposed, which one of these are just like social constructs that they can just chip away at. And they literally, like, children can chip away. And when we give them the tools, they have fun with that. They'll chip away at it, and allows the child to be able to explore the ways in which they are humanity is truly alike, and explore the ways in which these social constructs are made to be oppressive. So seeing race as a social construct, understanding their phenotypes, understanding maybe my hair is curlier because my ancestors came from a hotter place and I needed to absorb the moisture to cool myself down. Or maybe my hair is straighter because my ancestors came from a colder place where if I had icicles on my head, it could kind of fall off. So understanding those aspects of what makes a human and what makes you survive, and also understanding your difference and being able to celebrate those, and understanding the social injustices on top of them.
I'm going to come from a philosophical point of view. And I personally believe that the personal is always already deeply embedded in the social. We like to see ourselves as bounded individuals who are self-made, but in reality, what we call individual is constantly emerging and re-emerging through past and present relations. There's this concept that the feminist scholar Donna Haraway talks about called past presence, which basically means that the past is perpetually unfolding, shaping, and emerging and materializing in the present and in the future. For instance, as a queer South Asian male who grew up in Kerala, India, the way I see the world and the way I move in the world is shaped by my histories, which was in turn shaped by Aryanization, colonialism, and imperialism. So in this sense, I don't believe we exist in isolation. The individual is constantly emerging through social relations.
Thank you, Sid. So it ties back to what Tatenda said in terms of the fact that we bring our own stories. One of Dr. Montessori's statements that is often confusing to people is the child is a father to the man. And of course, it's very gender-specific vocabulary. So what is your interpretation about how the child that you were formed the person that you are now?
Yes, I was just thinking of the story as Sid and Tatenda were talking. My story of self-development that really articulates what we're talking about was the year that I spent in Zimbabwe. I don't know if I got a chance to tell you that. Harare, Zimbabwe, fifth grade. So I went from growing up in Santa Cruz and figuring out somehow that I was supposed to be dumb and ugly and all this kind of stuff, all of these social oppression, microaggressions that were viscerally threatening to shape my identity when I was there, and then being, flown across to a whole nother country. And all of a sudden I am hearing, and this is my very simplistic fifth grade mind, oh, you're pretty and you're naturally smart, and so, and that's when I'm like, well, what happened? I'm the same person. I know I'm the same person that I was. I just moved places, and it let me see really clearly this dialectic. What society is telling me can shift and change, but how I do have an active role in how it is that I see myself, and I can choose kind of what side of this dialectic I want to be on in terms of how it is that I want to construct my identity. And it wasn't until later that I saw some of the implications of that, I'm coming from America, and everything that holds, which is the same oppressive elements that were there, but just I'm on the other side of the coin.
Yeah, I mean, Koren, it's funny that you mentioned that story, because my story happened the other way round, right? When I came to the United States, from Zimbabwe to the United States. And I struggled a lot just asking myself, why am I the only male identifying teacher taking this training, 0 to 3? And in one of our training lectures, we were asked to go back, think about your childhood, all the things that you have experienced. And I remember calling my mom and just trying to understand why am I wanting to be a teacher of young children. And she told me that she has always had this dream that she wanted to be a teacher or a nurse. And somehow I grew up to be that teacher. And then, of course, she went on to tell me about things that happened when I was little, how I was just so nurturing. You know, I was born in a family of 5 boys, being the last one. She was the one who really showed us that as boys, you know, we could really be anything. So she reminded me that it's not new. You actually live in my life, which I think, again, goes back to those stories that she grew up wanting to be a nurse, but she wasn't able to do that because she was, you know, a female in Rhodesia. She wasn't able to go to school and stuff like that. And one of my brother went to be a nurse, and and I'm a teacher. So we kind of like to see ourselves as living our mom's dream, even though I'm in a country where male teachers are not seen as, you know, teachers of young children. I was able to be reminded that I was where I was supposed to be, and that was not something new. It was just something that have always been, but just in environment where it's not seen as something that's normal. And now teachers can also be in these environments and working with young children.
There are two key aspects that came to my mind that have considerably shaped the way I see and live in the world. The first is when I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer and underwent 2 years of chemotherapy and radiotherapy. The care that I experienced during those years had an enormous sort of impact. You know, the care that I experienced from my mother, my sister, my father, and my extended family has, you know, really shaped the way that I care. So that's really one of the sort of events in my life that really shaped me. The other aspect just stemmed from 20 plus years of my life hiding my queerness. My earliest memory of being attracted to other boys was when I was 4. And later, when I gained awareness of it, I went through a lot of anguish and pain, trying very hard to change myself. And during that time, one of the most difficult things to experience was to hear how other people viewed people like me, their fears, their phobias, and disgust. Queer people were seen and spoken as deviant, mentally ill, and abnormal, and so forth. And one of the things that I wish people did back then was to be more curious and to try to listen to my lived experiences. So as an adult, I like to stay curious and to try to listen to other people's stories and lived experiences. And in this sort of regard, I really value how, the root word of the word curious, which is cura, is care. So if you really, really, really care for someone, you will be willing to suspend your fears, your perceptions, your beliefs in order to be curious and care. So.
Thank you, Sid. That was beautiful. And I believe it touched us all very deeply. Thank you for sharing something as personal as that. I have way more experiences than any of you, sheerly by the privilege of having lived so much longer than any of you. But I want to refer back to way back when, many years ago in Mexico, when I was on the other side of your coin in a way, Sid. I'm visibly white. Being a girl, as Tatenda said, and as Koren indicated, both limited me and gave me a lot of opportunities. My mother always encouraged me to go to school, go to university, have a career. That was not what was acceptable in our society. It was be pretty, put on makeup, and get married early, which fortunately my parents did not believe in. My mother was not able to go to work because it was not the right thing, but she always volunteered. And I remember her coming home with her uniform, an ugly gray uniform, as she used to work as a volunteer in the Institute of Rehabilitation. So she would take us to see people who were very disadvantaged in every way, sometimes mentally, and sometimes they had lost an arm, a leg. And my mother used to go and work with them and do therapy with them. And I love the fact that she brought all 4 of her children to that so that we could see how lucky and privileged we were. And my dad was the same. He was a volunteer with the Rotarian Association. And later in life, they moved to a small town, and he was deeply involved with an orphanage, with children with cleft palate. So both my parents had a very strong desire back in their time to do something and to give back to the world. So I was born with privilege, but I also knew that I had a lot of limitations. And then as a Jewish person, that brought all its own issues in terms of all the anti-Semitism and all the stereotypes and all those things. You know, the important work that we need to do now, whatever we bring that brought us to where we are now, what's important is what we do with that and how we share that with, with the new generations that are coming. In terms of your research and your line of work, Sid, what have you found in contemporary research that is congruent or resonates with Montessori theory?
I think one of the things that I do appreciate about Montessori's writing is that she contradicts herself all the time. And sometimes contradicts herself in the same passage, So you find many thoughts and that were quite ahead of her time. At the same time, you find views that were either of the time or even views that were not quite as progressive for the time. What we can truly appreciate in Montessori's work is that it continues to be relevant today in her commitment to social justice. Her feminist activism and child advocacy were driven by her frustration with how the society systematically and systemically treated women and children unjustly. And now we know so much more about social justice and racial justice and all kinds of, equity issues. I believe in order for Montessori to continue to be relevant, we really need to engage with current understandings of social justice. In my own research, I find there is a desperate need to decolonize Montessori, and that we need to engage with indigenous scholarship and worldviews that may even question some of the things that we consider second nature in Montessori.
So can you explain a little bit more about what you mean in terms of decolonizing Montessori?
So basically, a knowledge frames the knowledges that are inherent in Montessori's worldview are white-centric views. For instance, objectivity, reflection. So many concepts that we take on board and we practice in our daily lives do not fit with many indigenous worldviews, where they see the world as entangled and objectivity not being a thing, really. So it really has to be a decolonization of knowledge in itself, and what we understand as knowledge. What is knowledge? Is it just the rational, sort of objective aspects, or is it the affective, emotional aspects that contribute to what we consider knowledge?
Tatenda, I know you've written about whether Montessori is revolutionary or should learn from older wisdom. Can you elaborate a little bit on that based on what Sid just said?
Exactly. I think just Sid shared the wisdom already in that. I like how he say, Maria Montessori often contradicts herself in her writing. Getting back to decolonization and Montessori really not being anything new, because one thing that I've noticed or observed, to use a Montessori term, is when we talk about Montessori, especially to people who are not white, it's more as if we're introducing something new. I mean, I can talk of my own experience, being an African male teacher, that I often hear people asking me like, so how did you discover Montessori? And it's a very good question, but I see in it also like, you're from Africa, from Zimbabwe, and Montessori, they can't make, the connection, right? I many times I'll just say like, I found Montessori, I went to a school, I saw this, it was really nice and beautiful, the little tables and everything child-sized. I would talk Montessori words in Montessori, environments, how I discovered Montessori. But then I started thinking about it, like reflecting to how really did I discover Montessori when I was in Beijing in 2009. And one thing that I remember very well when I was invited to that school to observe was that everything resonated with how I grew up in Zimbabwe, how I was when I was little, my mom, my aunts, like how everything was about community, learning from your brothers, learning from everybody, the mixed age group, and so centered in coming together and learning together. And I knew then that Montessori was nothing new. if there was anything, it was just like what indigenous cultures, African cultures, Latinx cultures have known for child development, for learning, for education. So Montessori really, indeed, it isn't anything new to people who are not white. Before colonization, they knew how to bring the kids together to learn and to acquire those skills. They had to acquire skills. They had to be hands-on. They had to work with something so that they can be useful in the society. Montessori was just privileged to have the scientific ways to write that down and create this pedagogy. I think that's one thing. I think Sid kind of shared a little bit about it, that the way we share Montessori has to change. We don't have to think that this is something that's new, that's, but just going back to what we know.
Yes, what you're saying is so true. I oftentimes bring to folks' awareness Asa Hilliard's work, who spoke at the NAMTA conference in 1996 and 1998. And in that particular lecture, he talks about the Keynesian philosophy, which predated Montessori, which comes from the Congo. The art of babysitting is what they call it. So this was something that happened pre-colonial times, and then is still carrying on in colonial times. He goes on to talk about the relevance with many different theorists, from in many different countries. I think Japan, Ireland, et cetera. But I definitely honed in on work I call Montessori Roots Historical Truth, that talks about the parallel between the African intuitive, this is what I call it, pedagogies, and Montessori pedagogies, because what you have within Montessori are really intuitive elements of liberation. You have liberatory elements. I just wrote a paper with Angeline Lillard and Virginia McHugh called Authentic Montessori and Contemporary Considerations, and I outline some of these elements. So you think about the true meaning of education, which means to unleash that which is within. It is the process of self-actualization and taking away, any kind of oppressive elements that would be in the way of the child kind of doing that work of self.
Can you tell me what you're thinking about in terms of liberation and anti-oppression? How does that work together?
This is rooted in Barbara J. Love's notion of liberatory consciousness, which is simply an ability to be and self-actualize without oppressive elements. I'm not quoting her directly. So the way I like to say it, and the way I see myself more viscerally, is like that newly formed butterfly that's coming out of my cocoon with awkward wings that are just kind of, growing and knocking down, destroying oppressive systems all around me. Not that that's my aim. My aim is liberation, the liberation of my own internal humanity, self-expression, and the casualty is the destruction of racism and oppression around me. But my goal is to become a liberated human. That's what activism is about. When we're activists, all we're doing is activating our humanity. Maria Montessori kind of epitomizes that. And she says, either education contributes to a movement of universal liberation by showing the way to defend and raise humanity, or it becomes like one of those organs which have shriveled up by not being used during the evolution of the organism.
Hearing you all talk about all the differences and the ability to have diversity and inclusion brings to mind my own personal situation at this moment in the universe, in which I'm working in a Montessori Jewish day school. And it's the ability to live Montessori principles, those that are more progressive for sure, and bringing that openness to a context that would otherwise be very exclusive. We're very proud to be very racially integrated, to have visible people that are visibly different, and everybody treats it as a matter of course. So we have people with different skin colors, with different ethnicities, and nobody questions that. All the anti-Semitism certainly merges with all the other antis and all the other biases in the world. And at our school, we're also very proud of being very inclusive in terms of different abilities. So we have children who have huge differences, who are perhaps nonverbal, not able to walk, not able to feed themselves, and they are cherished and adored, and to use your term, Koren, revered by the other children. In our middle school, our children have a charity every year. They choose a charity to which they will give proceeds from their microeconomy. And I am proud to tell you that in my little tiny school in Toronto, the adolescents in our school chose to give to Black Lives Matter this year. So within a sheltered community, we are fostering openness and integration. I believe what we're doing really well in Montessori is that broader awareness of the world and that developing empathy in children. Another topic that's really close to my personal heart, and I'm sure is to yours, is the idea of peace education. How do you see the complementarity aspects of social justice and peace education today in 2020?
Wow, what a big question. Like today in 2020 means that we are in the middle of pandemics of all kinds. It's so interesting, Montessori's leaning on practical life, right? Being able to look at real problems and solve them in real time, within our sphere of influence, which is what needs to happen. I don't think there's a way around it. I think that, if you're not doing liberatory education, you're not doing Montessori. The children aren't leaving, being able to see how they can be contributors, not only within the classroom, but where they are locally in society, then we're not doing our job. So what people fail to see is that peace lies on the foundation of justice. You can't eat peace. I like to say that. Like, you can go to the peace table, but it has 4 legs in order for it to stand. And those legs are the legs of justice. We have to have a sense of inclusion. We have to have equity. Children have to be free to create and construct their own identity. And they have to be aware not only of who they are, but of those around them. They can understand that this true peace, this true reconciliation has a foundation of social justice. So.
I see peace as wholeness, shalom. A community or society cannot be whole when some of its members are hurting and they're experiencing injustice. But one of the things that I really, really feel strongly about is what Haraway calls situated sort of knowledges. I understand that there is a sense of urgency in the U.S. in relation to Black Lives Matter, and I, fully stand in solidarity with my Black and brown kin in the U.S. However, because of how U.S. is positioned in the global scene, I find people think racial violence is a phenomena that is unique to Black and brown communities in North America. For instance, I was recently in a Facebook group that was created by South Asians to show their solidarity towards BLM movement. And what I found really frustrating was that these folks who were so passionate about BLM were indifferent towards the immense levels of violence that Dalit communities in India were experiencing and have experienced for centuries. And these stories of violence and oppression, they don't really make it into global news. They don't even make it into national news in India. So I really feel that there needs to be some sort of a situatedness, some sort of a grounding that needs to happen. So people who are in certain localities, in certain, localized contexts, that they need to raise awareness of the situated injustices that are prevalent in those areas. And I think this is perhaps one of the ways that Montessori could be relevant in grappling with the local injustices, which are very unique to those areas and which are really prevalent.
So from the general to the particular and back again, right? The universality of our principles, but applicable everywhere at every local, at the very basic local level.
The work of peace education is social justice. We cannot do peace education without social justice. one thing that I've been very passionate about is just the way we get trained, as Montessori teachers, and the way we kind of like stick to our albums. I know we kind of feel, have a strong sense and connection to them as our Bibles, but I've always questioned what we are taught to present in our classrooms, in our environments. Because some of it I see it as very oppressive, as thing that we could change, like the way we introduce continents and countries when you're doing geography. We assume that every child is going to go on a summer vacation in London. Every child is going to go to Estes Park in the winter, or going to go to the Caribbean. So we take it for granted that when we introduce this, somebody has traveled, but that's not real. That's not the reality with every child. And I often think about like children who haven't traveled, but they've heard stories from their families, from their parents, from their grandparents who came from Africa, who came from Asia, who came from everywhere, and were able to travel through those stories. So just thinking about like, how do I introduce this concept, knowing who your children are in the classroom, as a way to just bring about that peace education. To me, that is peace education. It's not just going to a peace rose and having them take turns talk about, oh, you hurt my feelings. I hear you saying you hurt my feelings. But like, what about all those materials in the classroom that are hurting someone's feelings, that children are struggling to even choose, and we think they're not choosing work, but really they cannot relate to how it is presented or to how it was presented. So just thinking about that, to me, is the work that we should be doing when it comes to social justice. What am I putting in the environment? How am I going to introduce this?
Perhaps it behooves us to turn back to our teacher education programs and start there when new guides are being educated and made aware of. Well, Dr. Montessori said it's not a method. It's an approach, it's a way of life. And it's important for us to realize that this way of life has a deep impact by being aware of the great potential we have for making a difference, for bringing up young people who are aware of their own authenticity, of their own liberation, of the problem solving, and the idea of looking at their communities and seeing how can they contribute, how can they give back, how they can make a change. I was looking at Education and Peace this morning, and I don't know if you remember, Koren, but she does talk about a plague, the plagues that humanity has lived through. So this was very relevant for me today, as was the fact that she talks about the airwaves and how people are going to be communicating through the airwaves and there will be no more boundaries. So I'm excited to be participating in this great big project of the 150th anniversary with all of you where you are. And as we share our ideas, our visions, our worries, and our aspirations with the rest of the world.
Yes, you reminded me of a quote that I had in my paper, Montessori, Authentic or Keeping It Real. Nobody's life is safe. We are in mortal danger. People have to take to shelters. Humanity itself is vanquished and enslaved, which rings true to where we are right now. So we're in a place in time where we've had to rethink how we're going to meet our fundamental needs. How are we going to survive as human beings? And so I challenge everybody to rethink how it is that we are orchestrating our humanity. How is it that we are living into what it means to be a self-actualized human, and how it is that we can make sure that we are creating space for all of those who are marginalized to do the same.
Yeah, I'm always taken back to Maya Angelou's words. When we know better, we do better. It has always been a comfort for me that this work is, we are going to make mistakes. We are always making mistakes, but we're also learning. But when we learn, we do better from what we have learned and from, learning from others in community. This work of social justice it's just the same as teaching algebra. It's not easy, right? It's the same as just teaching language. Once we know better, we have to do better. Just give ourselves grace as we do the work, and knowing that in so doing, we are doing the work.
I'd say be curious, listen, care, and amplify and center voices from communities that are marginalized.
We need to start. We need to start now from wherever we are, and let our own experience guide us, and the trust in the child and the trust in the importance of the work that we need to do.
You just reminded me of a quote it's a Chinese proverb that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to do it is now. So yeah, just spot on.
Thank you so much, Sid, Koren, Tatenda. This has been such a pleasure and such an exhilarating experience to share this moment in time with you. And I'd like to end the session by asking all the audience to check your email and the Montessori Everywhere website. There will be all kinds of links to the Connect Pavilion Zoom calls and to the cafe conversations.